Alpha Draft, Alpha Draft, Fantasy Esports. If you want to play Fantasy Esports, then play it at Alpha Draft. This is not forcing you, it's optional. It's optional. That's the end. So, okay. Thorin vs. Reddit, episode 4, back in CSGO realm. Got a lot to cover here, so let's get right into it. So, okay, the first one is only got a couple of points, and it was actually from the last Thorin vs. Reddit, and it says it's someone responding to when I explained that Richard Lewis wasn't entirely ridiculous by responding angrily to people who tweeted at him telling they didn't like his casting, he shouldn't be drinking alcohol, these sorts of things. So this guy's responding to that, and he says, first he says, we can't tell RL, Richard Lewis, that we don't like him casting while drinking beer. And then he just destroys this weird caster guy, and suddenly it's okay. I get it that Thorin stands up for his mate, but he's not making a good point. Now here's the thing, okay, he gets mad at me bagging on Raheem. Now, remember, the way I treated Raheem and the way people like this guy have treated Richard, okay? So, Raheem isn't forced to listen to my video, Thorin vs. Reddit, episode 2, CSGO. He's not forced to. He never has to encounter me ripping on him if he doesn't want to. He's not forced. He's not directly addressed. I didn't tweet at him, so he'd likely see it. I didn't contact him via email. I didn't add him on Skype and tell him these things. Are you getting the fucking context yet? He can go his whole life, if he chooses to, without ever experiencing my criticism of him and me making fun of him. But when you criticize Richard directly, then he sees your criticism of him and will react differently. And that is an entirely different set of context. Context is literally everything. If your mum says to you, oh, I could wring your neck, she says it jokingly. You don't go and go, right, write that down on paper. Look at that, I could wring your neck. That's what a murderer would say. And then go and have her arrested for threatening, attempted murder, essentially. You don't go and have her arrested, do you? What's funny, though, is this is the real way that modern day people do things. They purposely remove the context, view things in black and white, and then go, oh, I'm offended and upset by that. How dare you do that? It's like, I mean, we're obviously talking about feminists, fucking PC cunts. It's like the internet. It should be the greatest invention in human history. It should, in theory, store all of the collective knowledge and art expression of the human race, from the philosophy of the Greeks to the collected works of Shakespeare. But in reality, what most people use it for is it's a device to allow reasonably well-off white people to make themselves butthurt at all hours of the day, no matter where they may be in the world. That's what the fucking internet's for. Right, next one. So this was from the thread where Nex, the Mouse Sports player, had tweeted out a picture from Gaming Paradise, which was of some disgusting looking food in some sort of a buffet. And then people took the implication from that, like, oh, he's saying that that's the food at Gaming Paradise. They thought it was supposed to be a picture of the food at Gaming Paradise. So a thread was made about it, and the thread was actually about how Nex was lying about the food at there. And then the guy did a search, and he found that actually this picture that Nex had posted was a picture just from Google Images, was nothing to do with the Gaming Paradise. In fact, it was from years before. I think it was in 2011, the guy said. And so because of this, he's lying. He clearly has an agenda. He's an asshole. But here's the part that I don't get about this. Nex never actually said it explicitly was the food at the Gaming Paradise. He was making a joke about the fact he didn't like the food at Gaming Paradise, and so just put a picture that he found on Google Images, just like this guy. He wasn't trying to hide this. He just put a picture that he found on Google Images of some horrible food, as if to say, oh, horrible food. Now, what's funny is, the whole offense and the whole thing about him lying took place one place, and that was inside the people's minds who were mad at this. So essentially, these people made themselves mad at something they themselves had assumed, connected it, made it a big deal, and then got super upset and then called him a liar. Yet that's not actually what he did in any particular sense. He just made a joke, never said it was anything particularly serious, never said, this is a disgrace, how dare they have food like this, I will never come to this event again, this is all my years at event, never did any of that stuff. It's the person on Reddit who got butthurt at this. So you see the way people will make ridiculous connections and jumps and claim that this is like the only interpretation that was implied, and yet it's not at all. It's entirely within your mind, and you have to look at yourself and why you came to those conclusions. In the same thread, there was a post with 40 points that said, Slovenia, which is where Gaming Paradise was held, is a great country. Don't bash Slovenia when a dude from Serbia decided he wanted to con some people in a different country. Now, while I agree it's not the fault of Slovenia that Gaming Paradise was bad, and also this guy apparently was from Serbia and wasn't from Slovenia, okay, I can accept all these facts. It's just a general trend I've noticed online that everyone in the entire fucking world who comes from a country tells you, oh, my country is beautiful and the women especially are very beautiful there. Oh, and my country, the people of my country are very honest and hardworking, and, you know, they want a day's wage for a day's work. You hear this from every fucking country in the world. Can you understand that you grew up there? You are used to that environment. You have been taught the things that are good that are within your country. Things when you go to other countries that are even good might take time to adapt to because they are different. And so just the sheer difference makes them initially unsettling, or you have to learn to adapt to them. It's a bit ridiculous when every country in the world is beautiful, has beautiful women, has the most hardworking people. Oh, except England, right? I mean, everyone who's talking about England on these websites never has any problem telling me how shit the food is there and how all the women there are ugly and how no one works hard and they're all losers on the dole and getting government handouts and all racists and stuff. It's always people who aren't in your country, remember, who are the pieces of shit and their country's not good. But if you go to some fucking Eastern European country, which certainly will definitely have some problems, I've been to tons of them, you can never ever suggest there's any problems there, right, guys? That's intellectual honesty, right? Then there was later on in the same thread about next in the food, someone who said this only had 3 points. Oh no, this had 49 points. The guy said, but people took it seriously and he didn't say anything. So even better, when people took it seriously that he was saying that this was the food at Gaming Paradise, he's now to blame for not then coming on Reddit and saying something. So let's think about this perfect assumption. So of course, Nex, while he's at a fucking tournament, is expected to be on Reddit scouring it in case people post a tweet of some food he said was at the event, which again, he didn't actually say it was at the event. He just said something about the food and posted a picture of the food. It was you who assumed that. Not only that, he just posted it on Twitter. He didn't make a Reddit post about it. So he's supposed to scour Reddit, find where someone says that. Then he's obliged as an honourable citizen of the land to answer every inane, asinine, stupid tweet, or Reddit comment rather, explaining to them in great detail that this wasn't actually a picture of that food and not to make assumptions about that, and he wants to set the record straight. This is utterly retarded. This is where another thing people do as well. Another line of logic that people go down that tilts me so hard, where they imply that if you don't respond to something when accused of something, you must be guilty because an innocent man would defend himself. That's not the case at all. In fact, there are times when someone with no basis accuses you of something or tells you, I demand an answer on this, you are in no way obliged to respond to that person. Why does that person run your life and you now have to defend yourself? Not only that, if you're innocent, why do you have to defend yourself to some random person? Not a court, not someone who's going to potentially put you in jail, just some random court of public opinion. You're absolutely not obliged to do so, and it's a ridiculous assumption. So there was a thread where Steel did a demo review of a Na'Vi versus Envious game at ESL. So I'm assuming that was ESL 1 Cologne in the round of 8 there. And this comment was quite heavily downvoted, but I thought it was a great example of what people actually do all the time to people who aren't superstars, but who critique or criticize a superstar. And so it said this. Yeah, I watched his Get Right review, and I don't understand what Steel has achieved for him to basically slate Get Right in every single round versus Fnatic. I mean, it's easy for him to review every round while taking time to think about what's going on, etc. Maybe Get Right should review one of his demos. I don't even understand why people actually sub/donate to this guy. He stole money from the scene. He's an absolute prick on stream. Yeah, he's got good game sense and knows flashes, smokes, etc. But his aim is average. Now, while on one level, part of this makes a good point, which is that it is easier to review things after the fact. Certainly the case. But here's the main problem with the gist of this, which is that because Steel hasn't accomplished much, doesn't have as good aim, isn't as good a player and Stole, he can't critique Get Right doing things that are incorrect because Get Right's better, therefore somehow Steel can't know that they're better, right? The logic of this is literally that clearly because Get Right has better aim and has won more trophies than Steel, that means Steel can't possibly know more about CSGO as a game, or, not even more, just anything worthwhile to say about Get Right's play. So even within his own criticism, this guy actually arrives at a key point as to why Steele can, even if Steele didn't know as much as Get Right, which is, as you mentioned, Steele has time to review the game afterwards, look at the context of what happens in the later rounds. Was it a good save here? Look at the specifics of slow the game down. What key options did he have here? Because of that, Steele is doing it after the fact. Now, here's what's funny. Get Right might be able to do that himself after the fact and do a really good job, but he hasn't done that and most likely won't do that. So Steele is offering something of value to the community. Also, just because Get Right has better aim doesn't mean that he knows more than Steele in this particular sense, or the particular things that Steele knows. Remember, it's not a contest who knows more, it's who knows something in this one area. Just because the depth of knowledge is very good doesn't mean that it's incredibly broad or very wide and horizontal. Likewise, because Steele has the chance to review after the fact, he might be able to find out things about Get Right's play that are really good points to make that Get Right himself did wrong in the game because Get Right's within the moment. So you're explaining again, indirectly, the value of what Steele did. It's amazing that people like this actually exist in 2015 still use this line of reasoning. I mean, I always put it very simply like this. Who do you think knows more about CSGO as a game and how the game strategically should be played and the right moves to do? Pronax, in-game leader of Fnatic, who accomplished incredible things and was the guy who read the game and knew the tactics, or Olafmeister, a significantly better player in terms of skill, in terms of aiming, in terms of taking duels, in terms of technique, and yet we all can see that it's clearly Pronax would be the one who had more knowledge, or more knowledge that would be applicable to making strategic decisions and deciding what the right play was. Not least because Get Right's Olafmeister's incredible skills could let him get away with things that would be inefficient for a player like Pronax, who has less skill. So yeah, it's an obvious example to make. So when I did an AMA a few months ago, it was about 3 months ago, this comment had 12 points. It said, I personally don't enjoy listening to 12-year-old kids raging at me for playing bad, especially since they're usually even worse than I am. I'm not offended by that at all, and I do mute them, but it's still very annoying. Why is it that in pretty much any offline setting, such behaviour would be considered very inappropriate, but when it's online, I'm a crybaby for not liking it? What a ridiculous question, the way this is set up. How about because it's a totally different situation when you are online in a fucking video game as opposed to offline in real life? Is that really, are you really confused by that? If you not understand the basic context that's going on there and the difference between real life and the fucking video game, are you really confused by that? Imagine me doing the same thing. Okay, why is it that someone can tell me to go and fuck myself in a football game, but if I do that to the chairman of the board at our next meeting, I get fired? This is just unfair. Why am I a crybaby for saying this isn't equal treatment? Or here's another one. Here's an more extreme one. Okay, why is it if I raise my arm like this in class, I get to answer a question and will possibly be rewarded with praise for a good effort or correct answer. But if I do this in 1939, people consider me a horrible Nazi and I am hated, possibly tried for war crimes after 1945. Really? Again, we're just going to take ridiculous situations, transpose them so that all the circumstances are different and be like, I should be treated equally at all times. That really makes it seem like you've got some sort of social awkwardness or mental problem where you interpret things so literally, you really think you should be allowed to say everything in every scenario, do everything in every scenario with no context behind it whatsoever. So if you go downstairs in the night and a burglar is in your house and he has a knife pointing at you, I'm imagining you'll think he'll attack you, kill you, you'll maybe call the police. If you come downstairs in the night and your mum's there, the knife's pointed at you and she's chopping up some carrots, you're probably not going to go, whoa, listen, it's not worth it, man. Like, the police will get you. I'll let you go if you just... No, you're not going to do that, are you? Please, mum, don't kill me. Because the context is all different. Therefore, the same act is totally perceived differently and treated differently. Pretty easy to understand, I reckon. So there was a thread where when the Zeus was overpowered for a bit because it was so incredibly cheap, JW made his comments about it, and he was actually saying, like, there's problems with this. So a guy, 92 points, said, coming from the guy who abused the CZ to death. Now what's funny about that is, he says that in like a cynical way, as if like, who should listen to JW? He just abused the CZ to death and just got all benefits out of that. So either he's doing that as in like we shouldn't take Jenner's opinion seriously, or he's thinking that JW liked the CZ, and therefore now when he complains about the Zeus, it's like, oh, this is rich. You like the CZ and you complain this. No, here's the great thing about people like JW and NBK, is that when things have been super OP and broken, like the mechanism is broken, like Jumping Scout, where he gives these weird advantages you shouldn't have for that much money, they actually complain about it, say it publicly, it shouldn't be the case, will openly admit, I don't think it should be the case, I would like it to be changed, but in the game still abuse them and still are very successful and still use them, and not everyone can use them in that way. So actually, that's called intellectual honesty. You should be praising JW, praising NBK for this. This is how you should behave. You shouldn't be like, well, I'm very good with the CZ, so I'll just tell everyone it's really balanced and that the gun shouldn't be changed, etc. No, that would be bullshit if you know deep down it is got some problems with it, and that's part of why you're able to abuse it so much. So in my thread for the top 20 CSGO players of all time, there were some classics in here, guys. So, okay, here's one. 7 points. This is where someone gets mad that that I didn't put Flusher higher. There was a lot of chain of people who wanted Flusher higher. Because you remember, 3 months ago was when he had a good little run. So everyone was like, he's the best in the world. Even though he wasn't. So, in my opinion. So, exactly my thought. He deducted JW's points for not performing in big games, and then he didn't give Flusher any credits for being a big game player. That was weird as fuck. And I think Flusher definitely deserves to be somewhere in the 5 to 10 range. Now, it's funny because you've actually kind of explained exactly why both of those players didn't get high. So in JW's case, let's follow your premise. I deducted points for JW for not performing in big games. Stop a second. Then how did JW get anywhere? I mean, JW wasn't on the list, but how, in fact, no, he was on the list. I think he was just very low down. In this scenario, how did JW get any kind of credit at all? Because if I've removed points for not doing well in big games, well, let's sort it through. Where would he get the points from? He must be good in other games that aren't big games, and that's why it counted. Now let's go to Flusher. So if Flusher was on the list, but Flusher isn't the best player in the world in my opinion, therefore I don't think he's great in every game, how's Flusher gotten on that list then? It's almost like I've given him credit for being good in big games. Just that he wasn't great in all the games, just as JW wasn't. Therefore, he wasn't, an all-time great top 10 player of all time, who are players who tend to be very consistent and fantastic in all the games. What people forget here is, we're talking about the top 20 players of all time. If I say someone's the 22nd best player of all time, I'm giving him a huge compliment and saying he's a very good player. The idea that there was somehow like, I'm giving Flusher no credit, despite the fact he's in my top 20 of all time. Oh, really? Am I giving him no credit, for being a big game player? Where the fuck's the credit coming from then? Are people incapable of knowing what the English language is for? You're supposed to pick your words very carefully. If I use something extreme, I do it in an over-the-top manner, so it's obviously hyperbole. That's not what this guy's doing. This isn't hyperbole that I give him no credit. He's saying I just don't give him any credit for being a big game player. I certainly do. I just don't give him all the credit in the world and say, because he's a big game player, big games are the most important, therefore all that counts, therefore he is the best. No, ridiculous. Same thread. So this was regarding device. And now, this is 2 months ago, 27 points. This guy says, how can someone, he's talking about device, who essentially did nothing for 31 out of 36 months, come out at number 6? I thought this was a historical-based list for all of CS history. Okay, you ready for this? So, let's think about this. That is got to be one of the most ludicrous characterizations of Device's career I've ever seen. The idea that someone's a fan and has watched CSGO, this guy, 31 out of 36 months, he'd better have watched all 36 months if he's going to make that statement. Because that seems incredibly ignorant. This is one of the areas, right, where I get really tilted when people talk about Device, because they use him as an example whenever I talk about a player like Kirby, who has big games online, average games every now and then in group stages, and never tends to have good games in the deep parts of playoffs, of tournaments, big series of tournaments, against top teams. They'll say, oh, it's just like Device, because Device had to get over his choke issues. No. Device was someone who was a 90% complete player. He was a fucking monster in group stage games 30 months ago, mate. It wasn't that he failed all the time and he was average online and all the rest of it, and now he got really good. He didn't magically get 10 times better. What happened is he completed the last 10% of the entire game of Counter-Strike, which was to become clutch in big games, to get over choking in big games, to contribute decent performance, to become consistent. And that's when he went into that phase, which is when I did this top 20, by the way, where he was having Average of 20 kills, even in losses. Average of 20 kills every map over best of fives, best of threes against the best teams in the world who were at the peak of their powers in finals, in semi-finals. That's what changed about Device. The whole period of history prior to him fixing that, he was still a top 10 player in the world. He was fucking incredible. In group stage games, he could play world-class teams and beat them. If he played lower-level teams, he would fucking dominate them and have like 36 kills and rape them all over the map with the orb and dominate them in 1v1s and go with and get 4 kills with the M4A1 at the Catwalk and Dust 2 or whatever. He was an absolutely insanely good player. He just had this one flaw that if it was a big series, like semi-finals, quarterfinals, then he would choke on like the third map in the second half in a couple of key rounds, or he wouldn't contribute a star performance, he'd contribute an okay performance, so like, 15 kills, or he'd have like a little period of the game where he did well, they'd have a drought later on. That's all that happened. It wasn't that he was a bad player and he magically got loads better. He was a fantastic player, one of the best in the world, and in games except for the deciding third map type semi-final, he would sometimes outperform the best players in the world. Go watch the Copenhagen Games semi-final of 2014 when Dignitas plays against NIP. On map 1, I think it was Inferno, this is one of the games where he was going absolutely ham. He was having a great performance, but then they choked towards the end of the map, and then Nip comes back, and then Nip wins the series in close fashion. So that's a ridiculous characterization. That really suggests to me, I really wonder if this person's pretending to know what happened and they didn't watch that part of history. Because it's very strange to me that they could possibly make that characterization. Because the idea that he did nothing, I mean, even outside of his individual play, which was fantastic, by the way, he had incredible results. Yes, he didn't have tournament victories. He didn't make it to finals. He didn't win trophies. He had numerous top 8 finishes. He was always making the playoffs of majors, finishing top 8, finishing top 4 at tournaments, making deep runs, having big wins, winning key maps off opponents like NIP or Very Games or whoever it would be. Fantastic player who accomplished a lot in his career, and even without this last phase where he completed it and became a great player, yes, he wouldn't be at number 6 without that. He probably would be in the top 20 almost certainly, and might have been like 15th or something, or maybe even higher actually. Maybe he would have been like 10th and we'd be like, wow, he could have been higher if he'd got those wins, but he was still a fantastic player because the body of work that he did across his whole career, counting all offline games, all opponents, all stages of the tournament, he was an excellent player in all regards. In that sense, he just didn't have that last little level that the gods of the game had, and he did get it towards the end. Admittedly, he's fallen out of it a little bit recently, but he had it until this recent slump. He had it for maybe 2 or 3 months where he was very good in that sense, and he had overcome it in a large sense, and not only become contributor but a star in those moments. So ridiculous opinion, really. So let me see. Okay, same thread. This one only has -2 points, but it makes a point that I really want to make, because I've seen this repeated a number of times in different incarnations by people who characterize Existence and early Very Games in another very weird way in light of the Device scenario. So this guy says, I've followed the scene since the beginning. So remember, this guy's claiming to have watched all the big games, basically. I follow the scene since the beginning, and I strongly disagree with the inclusion of Existence. My point being, if a guy is up there and is constantly praised as being a tactical genius for being the in-game leader that was closely following Nip, but never managing to beat them, even though he was anti-stratting hard when it mattered at least. On the first major, I remember Nip just started losing to VG, but they were able to meet them on the Vega. Where is the IGL that was winning everything back then? And where is the IGL that is winning everything now? If Existence is there, Exist and Pronax need to be there too. Yeah, they had great players, but Existence had Kenny S, NBK, Shox, Scream, not at the same time I know, but still always had great lineups, playing under him and never managed to achieve anything significant. Now remember, this guy claims to have watched all those games. He claims to have been there since the beginning. Yet the way he characterizes history again is so skewed from the way I know any expert would speak about. If I ask, we're not talking about Thorin, it's Thorin biased to Existence. If I go and ask Semler, what was Very Games like in 2013? Or I go and ask Yanko, what do you think of Existence as an in-game leader? What he did differently to people like Existence era? They're going to tell me things at least within the realm of what I'm going to say now, and a million miles from what this guy's going to say. So when he says he never managed to achieve anything significant and that he never managed to beat Nip, even though he was anti-stratting them hard, then put when it mattered at least. No. That's what makes it suspicious, the idea that you say you were here from the beginning. because the majors weren't important until they appeared. Before the majors, we didn't have majors. So no one was sitting around, well, none of these tournaments count. No, those tournaments were the only tournaments that counted. We had no majors. So remember, the first major he's talking about them losing at here was the first major that was ever held. Before that, the Very Games team had beaten NIP in 3 straight offline best-of-3 series, including a final of an EMS tournament, which at the time was one of the bigger tournaments. So he won that tournament. And out of these 3 tournaments, Existence's team won 2 of them, and NIP won none of those 3. His team took over, being the best team in the world, and over this span of time where they were number 1, won something like 4 or 5 tournaments, 3 of them with NIP in at least. Yes, they didn't win the major. That was the one thing they didn't do. They made it to the final of the major. They made it to 3 maps in the semi-final of the major. Made it to 3 maps in the semi-final of the major. But it's true, they didn't win that one. But that was not the only tournament that mattered. And that did not... I mean, by the same logic, imagine if this guy was a NIP fan. Oh, well, NIP can't be all-time great team. Why? They only had one major where it mattered, where they actually won. All the rest of it just came second. So I guess they're not the greatest. No, they're great because of how fantastic they were in all the other tournaments. And beyond winning, when they came second in tournaments, and they came top 4 in tournaments, and they came top 8 in tournaments, Existence's record, not only in terms of trophies, is amazingly good for what people don't give him credit for. This guy's won something like 7 or 8 trophies in his career, a number of them at big international tournaments. That's a lot more than many players that you would cite now as great players have won. More than people like Guardian, certainly. Likewise, he had the best team in the world at a time when NIP had the 2 best players in the world. How did he do that? Or at least one of the best players in the world. I guess he had Shocks as well as his team. This is a ridiculous way to look at the Existence in his career. And again, the idea that he accomplished nothing significant isn't even vaguely true. His team was the best in the world for a period of time, is one of the top 5 lineups of all time, and won a number of tournaments, many trophies that were significant. And the idea that he never beat NIP, I mean, that's not even vaguely true. For a start off, he beat them with Titan lineups. He beat them with Very Games lineups. It's only the first 7 offline best of 3 where he was losing every single time. After that, he got wins. And in latter days, Titan, when they were a worse team than NIP, occasionally had wins over NIP, in theory. As in theory that they were worse. So, here's another great one. So, same thread. It says 4 points. Look at all the players that played poorly under Existence and left and joined Envious. They've had way better success and accomplished more after leaving Titan. Like who? I mean, remember the guy's saying that they played poorly under Existence. Okay. So we're trying to find people who played poorly under Existence, but then when they were in Envious, played much better. Can't think of a name myself. In fact, when I think of players, here's another way to think about Happy in Existence. Almost all of the great players that Happy and Existence have shared had their peaks of play were at their best ever under Existence. The only one I can think of where it's not the case is Apex, because Apex was at his absolute best in the LDLC that he was in, where they made it to the semi-final of ESL 1 Cologne in August of 2014, just before he joined Titan. That was his peak. In Titan, he had some problems there. Shocks, best player in the world, only when he was in Titan, or Very Games at the time, then going into Titan. That's when he was the best player in the world. NBK was one of literally the top 10 players in the world, but not playing a supportive role entirely, playing more of a lurk role in late 2013, during like the early part of 2014. It was at his absolute peak then. Scream was never better in his whole career than he was in sort of like August to October of 2013. I mean, he wasn't actually on Happy's team, so I'll take that one out, actually. Let me think who else you've got. Kenny S. Kenny S was a god on Titan from basically, well, it's almost a year, from about April of 2014 to about March of 2015. He was a god. Now, he was extremely good for the first 6 months of that. Then he was an absolute god for the next 6 months. Way better than he's ever been in Envious, I'm afraid. And who else have we got? Smiths. So, here's the thing. I'll give credit, actually. I'll give Smiths also can be another one. Because the thing is, when the CZ was OP, he had that mini JW style where on Inferno he was very good. He'd push up aggressively with the AWP, and then he would pull back with the CZ. That was probably his peak overall as an individual player. So I'll give you Smiths and Apex. There's 2. Who else have we got? So, yeah, that's about it, right? That's about all the players they've... Maniac. Maniac was never a great player he was never a very good player at all when he was in LDLC. He was quite a bad player, actually. He was just a jobber. He just made up the numbers. But he had that period after Kenny S dropped off in March of this year for a couple of months where he was playing great. He was playing fantastic support role. He was getting loads of 20 kill performances. Very good play. Great with the 5-7. Very good on cash, notably. Had a great set of performances there. Kaylee was good when he was on LDLC. Remember, if he was cheating by people's logic, he was supposed to be cheating this whole time. He was way better when he was on Titan. He was having dominating performances, especially that DreamHack Stockholm run when they were going ham on Dust 2 CT sides. He was playing absolute phenomenal. The majority of players played better and had better career peaks under Existence than they did under Happy. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. In terms of having success once they left Titan, I don't think that's fair to count that way, because first of all, the one person who's been in every single all-time great French lineup that's been number one in the world is NBK. Well, every player who's left Titan and gone to Envious hasn't had NBK in when they're in Titan. Then they've been Envious, they've had NBK. And the key thing about NBK is the way he facilitates what his leader's system is enables it to be so effective. So when Existence doesn't have it anymore, I don't find it that big a surprise his teams can't be number one. Whereas when he had NBK, his teams were number one, were fantastic, were some of the best teams in the world. Meanwhile, when Happy has NBK, his teams are some of the best in the world. His teams are Fnatic. I don't think that's some sort of coincidence between the two. I think there's a correlation there. There's also the factor that in most of the lineups, in fact, all the lineups of LDLC and Envious until the most recent one, all the ones of Envious had Shocks in it. What? The best French player of all time, you mean? You mean one of the absolute greatest top 5 players of all time? And he didn't have that in Titan, and so Envious was doing better. Weird that, isn't it? I can't figure out where it'd be. It's like there's all these advantages over on the Envious side of having better players almost. If anything, it's incredible that the Envious team used to lose to Fnatic every time it was meaningful, except when they got to the Gfinity Champion of Champions late this year. Meanwhile, Titan has numerous wins over Fnatic, including at one point in time accounting for half of Fnatic's losses on Inferno, the map that they were the best in the world at and made their dynasty. How are they doing that with lesser players? It's almost like they had a tactical system in place, a mind that could do more with less in terms of players than Happy's team that was incredibly skilled, but sometimes didn't always live up to their potential of what they could have done. Yeah, weird that, isn't it? Okay. This was in the thread where I was talking about Schneider stepping down from Dignitas. And this is just an example of how people talk on the internet and how illogical it is. So this guy with 30 points says, Rain speaks fluent Swedish, so you can consider him a Swedish member too. He's talking about G2, Kingwin at this point. A guy responds, obviously downvoted, but this is to make the point. No, he doesn't, question mark. Where did you get that from, question mark. Guy responds, 26 points. He talks Swedish when playing FPL with Swedes, and same goes for players like Reeston, Jacob, and so on. I'm from the same place as him, and it's not hard at all speaking Swedish, being a Norwegian. It's like talking English, basically. Now, here's some interesting facts for you. I actually looked up the guy who said no, he doesn't. Turns out he's Swedish. So he's Swedish, and he's talking about whether this Norwegian player can speak Swedish. And he says, no, he doesn't, question mark. Now, the guy who responds is Norwegian, himself knows about speaking Swedish, and fills him in that he does, and here's a place he does in FPL. Now, here's the problem with the guy's original statement. If he just said, oh, I didn't think he did, where did you hear him speaking Swedish? Then the same conversation would happen, but he wouldn't look like an idiot. Instead, he says, no, he doesn't. So this guy doesn't have any information. He's not even a Norwegian himself, yet he knows somehow that Rain can't speak Swedish, doesn't speak Swedish, and until it's proven to him, no, he doesn't. Like, it's not the case. I'm going to assert that he doesn't. I mean, this is just the way people on the internet, they always go with the line of certainty for some reason when they have lack of information. When you have a lack of information, you say, I don't know. Can you tell me the reason why that is? What is the case? Oh, I thought it wasn't the case, but I could be wrong. You have to at least leave the possibility. It's ridiculous to have that kind of certitude when you have no information. So this was a thread where JW and Get Right went back and forth with a bit of humour. And a guy with 5 points said, JW is a cool dude. He handles the JW pig stuff very well. To which someone replies, 1 point, his slightly cocky nature mixed with self-deprecating humour really emphasises his confidence. Now, it's funny that I notice to this day there are still people who think JW is really cocky. First of all, he actually isn't. I've known many of the players in CSGO. I've talked to many of them on camera and off camera. He's not particularly cocky. He sometimes does it for the camera, but he even does it in an obviously playful manner where it's a jape. He's doing it for fun. So we have some fun trash talk. It's a bit of hype. It's a bit of excitement for the fans. He even does it almost with like a winking aspect where it's like, oh, I'm obviously joking when I do this. Off camera, he's actually quite a humble guy. He's one of the few people where when I told him that he hadn't made it high on my greatest players of all time list, he was like, why is that? And then when I explained the reasons, he's like, okay, I understand like the reasons as to why you wouldn't do that. He wasn't like, this is an outrage, I'm way better than that person, I exist, I'm about 10 times better than him. He wasn't like that. He's actually quite a humble guy who understands his role within the team, etc. It's funny that people say that because it's only judging people from on-camera shit. And so they make these extreme conclusions that these guys have great big egos. The number of players that they talk about having egos blows my mind because the number of shit players, like the number of fucking mid-tier NA players who have way bigger egos than someone like JW blows my mind. I got a great 1.6 example for you. There was a guy in 1.6 who was an invite level player in NA, but nowhere near an international level player. He's called A2Z. And this guy, legitimately, behind the scenes, he might have even said something in playing it vaguely in public, but I know behind the scenes he definitely said this. He thought he was as good as Nothing when Nothing was one of the top 2 or 3 NA players and a legitimately bordering on star international player, except he didn't have that many good performances. This guy not only thought he was as good as Nothing, but that the only reason Nothing was doing better than him is because Nothing had better teammates. I mean, this is the level of the ego on some of the shitters in CSGO and 1.6. The number of pros who have enormous egos, or at least cocky by these people's standards, is ridiculous. Someone like JW is not even vaguely within there. He wouldn't even rank on there at all. On camera, he can do a bit of trash talk, and he's got a good personality for that. Off camera, not at all. And he's fucking Swedish. You know how few really cocky Swedish people are? There's not that many at all. They have more of a team mentality. They have more of that aspect. They might seem cocky with each other, but compared to someone like Simple, they're not even in the same universe as that guy in terms of cockiness. Okay, so this was where there was a thread about Get Right was about to play his 800th map in CSGO. And so a guy with 35 points says, Get Right came into 1.6 during the last few years. If he had come in earlier, or 1.6 lasted longer, he would be in the conversation for greatest 1.6 player with Neo and Forest. Something I agree with. So then a guy responds, only 1 point, Get Right came into 1.6 in 2007 and Forest in 2005. Not that big of a difference. So then here's the problem with that. Again, that makes it look like this guy just looked that up on some kind of Wikipedia or esports earnings to find out when he first made his performances. Because you have to realise that doesn't make any sense. Now, first of all, it's definitely not ridiculous to suggest Get Right might be the best CS player of all time already, if you count CSGO and 1.6. He already was one of the top 10 greatest 1.6 players of all time. But I agree with the first comment that part of his problem is he only was at an elite level from 2009 onwards, mainly 2010 was when he really peaked, so that he only had a couple of years to be one of the best, whereas Forrest had, like 5 or 6 years he was extremely good. So it's true. I agree with that guy. If 1.6 had just lasted longer, or somehow he'd been younger a couple of years before, I think he would be in contention to be the greatest 1.6 player of all time. He was on that sort of trajectory and had that sort of year-to-year consistency. Now, the way the guy presented it, though, who responded that, well, Get Right only came into 1.6 in 2007, to Forest in 2005. Here's the problem with that. In 2005, Forest was just on like a semi-pro, decent team that got really good, won a big tournament, then got into Fnatic in 2006, a top-level team, became a world-class player. So from 2006 onwards, Forrest was in position, thanks to his team and the great opportunity he had, to be accelerated. He was in position to start winning majors 2006 onwards every year. When Get Right came in 2007, he was playing for semi-pro Swedish teams, and he was stuck there. He got onto NIP, but it was a bad NIP lineup. They broke up shortly afterwards. Then he was playing around the scene again in just like third or fourth best Swedish teams, never really having a big chance at international tournaments. He didn't get his real break internationally, despite how good he was, until 2009. So actually, he only got 2009, 2010, 2011, and about half of 2012. So he got 3.5 years to be one of the greatest players of 1.6 era. If I give Forrest the same benefit of the doubt, so I go from 2006 onwards, he got 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011 and a half. So he got 6.5 years, 3 years more to have a chance to be an all-time great player. Well, a bit more than that, you know what I mean? 2.5 years. So, okay, so think about how many ridiculous amount of extra time Forrest had, and yet Get Right's not that far off. He is off, but he still did an incredible job in the amount of time he had. So that's actually a mischaracterization to suggest that they only had 2 years apart. It was actually in reality more like 4 years apart when you look at it. So in the thread where a guy made a tweet, okay, that was about like CSGO, I think it was in Australia, being on Fox Sports 1, maybe it was the Crown International, the tournament the Virtus Pro won over Immunity. And this guy had said something like, he was like shocked that they had like video games on a sports channel. So this post has 961 points, and it says, classic white middle-aged man men complaining about the younger generation and their choices of entertainment. I mean, chess is a sport, and I have never been leaping out of my chair to watch a game of chess like I did when watching Taz clutch a 1v2 at 14-15. The demographic is there, and the excitement is there. Why isn't it a sport in their eyes? Now, first of all, this wasn't just any old man. What I think happened is people didn't look into who it was saying this. The person saying this was someone called David Warner, who is an Australian international level professional cricketer. So he's not just a random old man, by the way. Someone who has some authority speaking about, he's a fucking professional sportsman for start off. But secondly, consider his perspective. Don't automatically assume he's an idiot, ignorant person, and that because he's saying this, it means games are worthless and that he's totally wrong. His statement that, why is it on Fox Sports 1? That actually seems pretty reasonable. I can understand why he wouldn't want video games to be on a sports channel. I mean, you made the case there that chess is a sport. So imagine if the channel was half chess. Again, you've just said you don't want to watch chess. So I don't consider chess a sport. I consider it a competition or a discipline or a game. So I would think it was ridiculous if they were taking up a lot of time on a sports channel with chess. And I could understand why people who don't like chess would be like, I don't want this on the sports channel. So I think that's quite reasonable. I mean, at this point in time, if we're going to say video games is a sport, what isn't a sport? I mean, for example, it's okay. You're saying video games. Well, is it Counter-Strike a sport? Okay, that. What about Hearthstone? That's a fucking card game with RNG. Is that a sport? Okay, if that's a sport, how about rock, paper, scissors? Do you know that with rock, paper, scissors, there's strategy? For example, apparently, I read this in an article once, men usually open with rock to represent their strength. Women go with scissors, whereas journalists tended to go with paper, interestingly. So there's trends to how they did it. Not only that, there are people who've been world champions in rock, paper, scissors, who've won big money tournaments, who've had consistency in placings. Yet it seems like a game that's random, right? Or there's only 3 options, or it's just a simple game of chance. But they're consistently having success. They're showing themselves to be their players. Is this a sport? Should fucking rock, paper, scissors be on the sports channel? Exactly, it's ridiculous. I can complain about Hearthstone not being an esport, and I don't think it should be on certain things. But this guy can't complain about fucking video games being on a sports channel. Also, why does it matter to you? You're watching the game on fucking line anyway. You're not watching it on TV. So calm the fuck down. If people don't want to watch it on TV, that's entirely fine to me. There's a thread about when the current top 4 in CSGO was like the VP, Fnatic, Envious, TSM, and there was kind of like a circle of who beat who. So 25 points. This guy says, NiP is still a tier 1 team, just the lower end. Now, I want to address this because I feel like that whole tier argument is completely... It's been diluted, it's confused, because no one actually defines what they mean by tiers. They usually mean by tiers, some people think all of the top 10 is tier 1. Some people think tier 2 means the next 10. Some people think tier 3 means you're the 50th best team in the world. Here's the thing, my conception of tier 1 is essentially what I call... I already had a conception of this. I had words that I always used in reporting, and I never used them except when they applied to the person. So my conception of tier 1 is elite teams. So... if you don't make it elite teams and you're willing to include, let's say, 8 teams or 6 or 7 teams in it, then to me, it degrades the concept of tier 1. Because there's obviously a level, and there was at the time there was a level between Envious and NiP, a clear, distinct level. Well, that level would almost make them in separate tiers, wouldn't it? Likewise, now, there's a level between NiP and Fnatic. There's a clear level. They're in different tiers. So to me, tier 1, to separate the tier 1 teams, is the elite teams. So I would put teams in there like Fnatic, Envious, TSM, Virtus.pro. Now then, if Na'Vi does very well as they have recently, they might join my tier 1 and become championship level teams. Before that, I would have had them down in tier 2 with NIP. Teams just below tier 1 but who don't win tournaments in general, aren't quite as good consistently, but will probably beat the teams in the tier below them, hence what gives them their tier. And tier 3 might be the ones below them. They might be like the Mouse Sports, Titan, Dignitas, those sorts of teams, Cloud9. If you don't do it this way, there's almost no point having tiers. There's no rule saying you can only have 3 tiers. You can have 50 tiers. In fact, doing so might make it more accurate if you do so. So, there was a thread about CSGO being played less by girls, and then it was about all the abuse they supposedly get. It was screenshots of all the things that I said to them. So this comment has 36 points. I have the same issues as the person above. It's totally unfair that I should have to 5-stack every time I want to play. I do 5-stack, it just means gets 5 people together. I do 5-stack, but my friends who I play with are all much better and higher ranks than me. I'd like to play around my level, but can't. If I play solo, I end up getting belittled, ignored, and harassed for being a girl. I give fantastic call-outs. Nice to write your own reviews. I have very good headphones and can hear very well in-game. Great ears. I get flat out ignored quite often just because I'm a girl. I mean, no one else gets ignored when they make great calls, you know. I'm constantly having my call-outs ignored and told I'm not a good player. Even if I'm top fragging. I mean, top fragging doesn't mean you're a good player. And have the most points, it doesn't matter because I'm a girl. So then someone responds and gets downvoted for it and tells her how to do a bind where by pressing F11, she disables voice, and pressing F12, she enables it again. If she just wants to disable someone who's annoying her, then enable it at the beginning of the round for a call out something. She responds, 1 point. I'm assuming it's a girl because she said she is. What if I told you I shouldn't have to mute players on my own team? Not a real solution. Just saying. This reminds me of where women will go on their Tumblr or their Twitter or Facebook and make this following statement and think it's like some fucking great genius revolutionary political statement or even something that has any value to it. What they'll say is, how about instead of teaching women how to avoid being raped, we just teach men not to fucking rape? And they think like, oh yeah, edgy as, oh, I've nailed it. Take that, patriarchy. I laugh my fucking ass off when I see that. Because what the fuck does shouldn't even mean in terms of shouldn't have to mute players on the team? You don't have to. You can listen to them, and if you're really next level, you could develop mental fortitude or do a bit of meditation and not let it bother you. Or, if it does bother you, you can mute them. It's optional. You shouldn't have to. Well, you don't have to. Let's discuss the word should. If we're going to start talking about should, are we really going to go crazy on fucking CSGO and what happens on voice comms? And if we're going to talk about should and the fucking unfairness of the world and all the fucked up things in the world, well, should we even be playing CS? Should we even be living in a society of this kind? Drugs, they likely shouldn't be illegal, right? Outer space missions, should they not have been pursued further rather than being halted in the late 80s when the programs were all shut down and money put into wars? There should be free transit between countries for anyone of good standing without having to have visas. Humans should be involved in some kind of psychedelic relationship with the Gaian Earth spirit of the Earth. Computers should not exist. Maybe they came from reverse engineering the Roswell crash in 1947. Possession should not be a thing. We should all live in harmony with nature the way humans were intended to. That's how we should live. I mean, don't use loaded terms like should. Try and explain yourself in a different manner. And again, I don't have that much sympathy for people who get super butthurt but can't mute people. I mute people all the time because they're speaking in fucking Russian. Or they're just saying, drop up, give me that up. I mute that guy. Guess what? Then he can't hear my call-outs, my fantastic call-outs, my wicked headphones. Yeah, great, get over it. It's not the end of the world. It's a fucking game where you shoot people in the head virtually. It's not supposed to be for hugs and cuddles and kisses. Get triggered. So, okay, next one. This was where the developers were talking something to do with, I think, map balance. And so this guy said, 3 points, I think the maps should strive for a 9-6 or 10-5 half for CTs, just because it's hard to get the economy going on CT. And if maps were more T-sided, it would most likely mean no ecoing for Ts unless CTs get 3 to 4 rounds in a row or heavy economic damage each round. Now, I actually think this is not a bad idea. I think this is, in general, I want a balanced map pool, but with the way CSGO is at the moment, the balanced map pool worked in CS 1.6 because of the balance between the sides and how the guns worked on the game. They each had a quality that was better than the other, but balanced out in another area by a weakness. I actually think that this isn't a bad idea for how to balance CSGO if more of the maps in general were slightly skewed to CT. Because, as he says, the economical aspect, especially because people can do force buys that are really risky on T side more so than CT, because they can choose where all the people are going to be and where the fights take place. I think that actually it wouldn't be bad necessarily to balance the game out, the problems in the game currently, by making the maps more CT-sided. Now, the reason why this is also a good idea, I've got a good reference point for you, is in StarCraft Brood War in Korea, the last update for StarCraft Brood War was in 2001, yet it was played as a top competitive game in Korea until 2012. So like 10 years, 11 years, depending on when it ended in 2012, like midway through the year. Now, the way they balanced the game, though, was there was no updates from the developer ever, so they used to balance the game using maps. They would try to get maps, and they would put new maps into the map pool, see what's stuck, keep ones that were good, throw some of the old ones out, bring new maps in. And one of the ways they would design maps is to try and fix some of the racial imbalance between Zerg and Protoss and Terran. So, for example, Protoss, it was hard to get some maps that were very good for them, but good for other units. So since... other races. So since Protoss was always the weakest race, they would always usually give them a period in the fall, in the autumn, where they had some maps that favoured them a bit and they could have a chance to go far in the 1v1 leagues. Likewise, when Terran and Zerg, one of them was imbalanced against the other, they would balance it out by putting the map pool so that maybe there was a Zerg map, or maybe the Terran maps were, some of those were taken out. It's not a bad idea. In lieu of, bear in mind, we have to wait for the developers to do something to be able to do anything in terms of balancing the game. They have to do it, Valve. In theory, community people can make the maps so that they can help this idea. I think it's a good idea competitively in the future. I'd like to see this as a way to balance the game out, actually. What is that thing there? And why do I keep trying to get it off? There, it's off now. So, okay, let me have a look here. Same thread. Here's a good one because it has 21 points. And it says here, it's on the debate about whether the map should be balanced in terms of 50-50 bias on the map. And this guy's arguing in favour of it. He says, why the hell not? There does not need to be CT heavy maps or T heavy maps. That doesn't demonstrate skill more because the maps have innate advantages that favour a side more. It's literally not skillful. 50-50 maps are good because they put both teams on even ground. That way, CT heavy teams will be able to shine on CT side and T heavy teams will be able to shine on T side. Look at Nuke. There's very little room for T-side creativity because of how awful the map design is. Do you seriously think that after years and years of Nuke being played, nobody has been creative enough to come up with strats that cause a balanced or T-side meta? No, because it's not possible, because CT side on Nuke is ridiculously easy to play. An inferior team can beat a more skilled team if they get CT side first and RNG their way through the pistol rounds. It's not good for the game. How can you possibly justify that teams have different styles bullshit? That clearly doesn't work out by definition because maps are imbalanced. Poor map balance does the opposite of what you suggest. It's oppressive and stifles creativity. So here's my question for this guy. He suggests that no creativity on T side. CT side, he said, was ridiculously easy to play and that inferior teams can beat more skilled teams with a better RNG and just getting CT side first. If that were true, then why does he think that teams refuse to play the great Nuke teams on Nuke? I mean, by this logic, if they just get CT side first and get a bit of RNG luck, they could beat a team that's better than them on the map. The team that's more skilled than them. Yet, in general, Nuke was one of the most banned maps in the whole game against the great Nuke teams. Against Titan, the one that had shocks in it. Against NIP, the great 87 and 01. Against Dignitas, the one that was the team that's now TSM. Against TSM currently, that team when it was on Nuke. These teams were so good on Nuke, teams were afraid to ever play them on it. Now, that doesn't make sense, though, if it's so easy to play the map, and the map automatically gifts the CTs rounds. What does he think made the great Nuke teams win these games? They were better than most at getting T-side rounds on Nuke, and they were better than everyone else on CT side. But how could that be the case if skill isn't involved in it, if tactics and team play aren't involved in it, if there's no strategy to it? How are they winning? How were they better on CT side if everyone just goes to CT side and auto RNGs their way to a great CT half? It doesn't make sense. His whole argument falls apart. And as I've mentioned many times over, I like to be a balance. Have CT-sided maps, have T-sided maps, have the odd close one. Let the game decide where they are as well. Because something like Cash at one point was very CT-sided. Then people started winning T-sides. Now it's more near the middle. The game and the metagame of how people play it decides that. So this was where... Let me see... Okay, so this was where I did one of my top 10 world rankings, and this guy has 4 points, and it says, this is talking about when Fnatic won the Virtus Pro Series at ESL 1 Cologne, the major, and then won the final against Envious. And it says, how can it be an unlikely win, because that's how I describe the Fnatic wins, if the favourite wins? It's like saying, if things were a bit different, they wouldn't have won. But then if things were a bit different, they would have won dominantly. Now, this guy doesn't seem to understand the concept. First of all, that it can be an unlikely win if, within the context of the game itself, they are losing the game, such as in the Virtus Pro and the Envious series, and they Pause, do an incredible comeback that's extremely unlikely, and then win the game. That can be an unlikely win because it doesn't. I didn't say before the game what it was. Secondly, he also doesn't seem to understand how rankings work. Being ranked number one does not make you the favourite for every match you play. For example, a team might have a good matchup against you. Titan used to have a great matchup against Fnatic when they were like number 6 or 7 best team. Fnatic was the clear number 1. Also, being ranked number 1 doesn't make you the favourite for every match anyway. Also doesn't make you the best team, by the way. Being ranked number 1, rankings tell you about the past, not the present or the future. Rankings tell you over the last 3 months that was the best team. Right now, they might not be the best team, but guess what? Even if they lose the next 2 tournaments, it might take 2 or 3 months for them to drop off number 1. Yet we can see from them losing now, they're not the best anymore. But being ranked is not the same as being the best. People conflate it often, but that's not the way it is. It doesn't predict the future, it tells you about the past. That's how rankings work. So this is in a thread that was called Thorin versus America, not a new series, even though I could obviously do hours of that shit. And this is where I'd said about NA teams making excuses and people hyping teams. And this guy has 5 points. And he says, again, who is hyping NA? We are hopeful and show support. That is not hype. It's pretty pathetic viewing people take glee in the failure of others. One would think a strong CS scene would be ideal. But the idiots who want their country to be the best while shitting on everyone else is just sad. Yes, let's have 3 top teams from one region competing against each other at every major. How fun and exciting. I really despise what this community has become. Now, first of all, what's great is the level of salt there is beautiful because he's mad that we trash talk NA, essentially, people from EU. Now, from my experience of North America as a country in real life, in sports, for example, whenever they're winning, so say they win the Olympics or they're winning at some other sport or they're winning in MMA or they're winning at anything, if other people from around the world use the kind of excuses NA players do in CS terms, well, our structure isn't as good here, we don't have the same tradition and we have the same amount of money and our players don't use steroids. What NA people do is they don't go, well, you try your hardest and I'm in an ideal scene, so I'm just glad that everyone's trying well and I appreciate your... What they do is NA people go, haha, get wrecked, faggot. Cry more. NA number 1. USA. Cry more, bitch. Loser. You're just jealous of us. Then when NA's losing, they go, like this guy, they go, how pathetic of you to trash talk. You should be above such things. I don't say that NA is better. I just support NA and hope they will do well. Why can't you just be polite? Why would you engage in this disrespectful and, quite frankly, childish trash talk? Same guy, by the way. Always the same fucking guys. It's unreal, the level of hypocrisy. Well, guess what? NA talks mad trash when they get on top. EU's talking mad trash. You can't stand the heat? Get out the kitchen, figot. See what I did there? Okay. So, in this thread was about how years ago the CS scene was really weird to watch. And he was actually talking about 1.6, I believe. So a guy with 17 points says, I miss that game. Guy with 31 points tells him, you don't. You miss being younger and having a few problems. Well, how presumptuous, eh? Then a guy responds to him, 8 points. Another person responding to the original guy, nostalgia in a nutshell. I remember when I was young, loved a game so much, and recently was like, nice. With emulators, I can enjoy this masterpiece once more. Just to be extremely disappointed. When you're younger, you also need less to be impressed. So obviously things looks and feel like they were better, brackets, at least better than what they actually were. Now, the problem with this is it's incredibly condescending and presumptuous because you're imagining you can relate to this guy's experiences. You've had similar experiences and you're characterizing his experiences in a certain way. Then you're making assumptions about how old he was, what his life was like. Here's the problem. People do this to me about 1.6, except when 1.6 came out, I mean, it wasn't actually 1.6, it was the first version of Counter-Strike, the Beta 1, was in 1999. Now, in 1999, I was, let me see, I think I was 16 in 1999. And so by the time it got to 1.6, which was in 2003, was it actually 2003, 1.6? Yeah, it was. 2003, I would have obviously been 20. So I was 20 when 1.6 came out and then had 9 more years to be played. Anyone who's going to tell me that it's just nostalgia, again, I wasn't a child, I wasn't 7, and this isn't a case that I played it then and then I haven't played it for years and years. No, I only played it competitively 3 years ago. And what's more, I've actually installed CS since, been on CS servers, and found it is still a superior game. It's fantastic. What's more, the original Quake, which had a client called Quake World, which is how you played it in the modern day, I actually have played that in 2005 to 2008. I've always gone back to it, played it again, because it's a superior game. It's better. I'm not just imagining, well, that was in 1997 when that game came out. Back then you were younger and times were easier and there were less troubles in life, so that's probably why you enjoyed it more. No, it's a much better game. I know you can't handle that and you want to reason against it, but that's the case. So I find it incredibly condescending when people try to just invalidate and deny all the experience of anyone else. I mean, let's use some film examples and see how ridiculous their argument would be without them knowing the experience of watching the films. So imagine someone says, Avengers must be a better film than Heat, because Heat came out, like around 1995. So, I mean, if you like Heat, you're just being nostalgic and, your life was better back then, you were younger, so you probably just enjoyed it more. No, Heat's a significantly better movie on all the criteria metrics that we judge good movies. Acting, direction, script, the ambience of the movie, the way it's shot, the cinematography, soundtrack, casting. It's better in all respects. So you can view games the same way and look at the merits in that sense. Likewise, let's do the same thing, because obviously by this guy's logic, nothing old can ever be better than anything new, right? So, I guess Justin Bieber's better than Led Zeppelin because they were like in the 70s. Justin Bieber's now. You're just thinking of that because you're an old person now, and in the 70s you were young and, you're probably smoking the devil's cabbage, a lot of weed, No, be ridiculous, wouldn't it? Again, you could judge them as a band and you could see it they're clearly better. And what's key in all these examples, with games, you can play them now. And if you play them now and you do find they're underwhelming, then yes, you can say that. But if you play them now, like I have with 1.6 and Quake World, you find they're better, it actually shows it wasn't nostalgia. Likewise, you can watch a movie now and it's fantastic now. You can listen to a band now and it's fantastic now. Don't be so fucking condescending. It's ridiculous. So, okay. This is where there was a thread saying that the NIP stars were allegedly owed a load of money. So this one will blow your fucking mind. These two posts here will be unreal for you if you haven't seen them. 89 points. So NIP has only been underperforming as a protest to not getting paid. Showed their hand one time against TSM at DreamHack Cluj in a "if you treat us properly, look what we can do" fashion, and then proceeded to throw the next game. A guy responds to him, 26 points. As daft as this may sound, it would explain why one of the best teams of all time suddenly became terrible. Let's be honest here, it makes far more sense than every other team in the world suddenly becoming amazing in the space of a month or two, especially when you consider, and he has a bunch of bullet points, all the teams talking about how great they were prior to the last ESL major. He means ESL 1 Cologne. The players' performances in FPL, they're obviously up to the level of other pros. NIP players standing in for other teams and putting on amazing displays, and then their performances at the last major were borderline trolling in this light. Oh look, we're losing to Titan in a best of 3. No wait, let's just win 26 out of the next 28 rounds and look like it's easy. Oh hi TSM, best team in the world. No, enjoy the trip home. Going to the finals? Nah, not getting the money that the company, that much money. Congrats Navi. Could be wishful thinking, well, nice of him to say so, but it seems far more likely to me that them still being incredible individual players who can win fine online, but just inexplicably fail to do anything of worth on LAN or for big money, makes far more sense to me that they are just serving out their contracts and not giving them any more money because we aren't getting paid. This is one of the most ridiculous fan theories I've ever heard. Because let's go through some of it, okay? So at the beginning he says that the first guy says that they played badly as a protest to not getting paid. Well, first of all, actually behind the scenes, I know that's not the case. But ignoring that, the notion that against TSM, they turned it on, wrecked them completely, doesn't make sense in the context of that match itself. Because TSM played significantly worse. Not just because someone was playing well against them. Virtus Pros played very well against TSM. Envious has played very well against TSM. TSM never played as badly against those teams as they did against NIP. And TSM played very poorly on 2 of their best maps, Train and Dust 2. Very uncharacteristic pass fashion. Device was very poor. NIP also played extremely above the level they've shown us, but not as in they were unlocking something, because, for example, Freiburg was incredible in that match. He's been terrible otherwise. What, is he secretly the best player in the world? No. He had an extremely fluky match. He played well. Exist was incredibly fluky. He was then getting crazy headshots all over the place that he never normally gets. This was just extreme form from one team, bad form from the other, meeting at the same time. Now, the notion that they threw the next game against Na'Vi is so fucking disrespectful, it's unreal. Did you watch those games? Guardian and Flamey took a fucking shit on NIP on train there. They were dominating them. They got something like 24 of the first 25 kills for Na'Vi, wrecking them the first half. That was godlike play, not Nip just purposely throwing the game. Nip couldn't do fuck all against them, and they knew it. Now, the notion also that that's like a more likely scenario, where it said here, remember, it makes more sense than why one of the best teams of all time suddenly became terrible. No, they didn't suddenly become terrible. It was a gradual decline. In NIP with Fiflaren, they started to decline. They started to not place top 8 at tournaments. Then they had that span of time where they didn't even qualify for 3 lands. And then the 2 lands they did go to, the last 2 lands of Fiflaren, they didn't even make the playoffs and they bombed out early. And then Fiflaren left. And then they had the good period with Makalele again. They improved at that point in time. And then started to gradually go downhill, getting wrecked by Envious. Then started getting wrecked by other teams. And then as other teams got better, TSM got Carrigan, got that shit together. Envious eventually made a change over the middle of the year. Dignitas had Pimpinese going crazy. Titan obviously had Kenny S and them going crazy early in the year. Na'Vi got Flamey and became better. There are reasons as to why all these teams became better and closed the gap and then eventually overtook NIP. Obviously all those teams didn't, but some of them did. It's not something like overnight Nip just became worse and it's some suspicious reason. That doesn't even vaguely make sense. Also, those other teams didn't magically become good. Some of them made roster moves. Some of them improved in key areas. Some of them improved matchups. The map pool even fucking changed. Nip lost Nuke, which was one of their best maps. Other teams like Na'Vi were able to rise off the back of Overpass, off the back of the Cobblestone, off the back of New Train. There's a plenty of circumstances, but this is a very naive way to look at the game. The world's so black and white when I'm listing all these great reasons as to why those things did happen. Also, let's look at the NIP lineup. The NIP lineup with Alu lacked firepower massively compared to the elite teams at the times they were the best in the year. When Fnatic was the best, they had so much firepower across the team that some of their worst players were JW and Flusher. Then you look at teams like Envious, had crazy lineups all year. TSM, incredible skill spread out. Na'Vi got a better player. Flamey became even more skilled. Virtus Pro always had incredible skill, and Snacks actually got better over the year. NIP lacked firepower. They had an outdated approach, this pugging style, where their players weren't anymore the best in the roles, so they couldn't make that style even work. Like Forrest at times wasn't that great as a second entry, he wasn't that great as a fragger at certain times in the year, he was at other times. Exist had real problems as an in-game leader, didn't read the game well, didn't map veto well. Freiburg was one of the worst entry fraggers among the elite level teams, or among the top 10 level teams all year long. I mean, they didn't utilise Alu properly when he was in the team compared to what he'd done in other teams. Get Right even tried to be the in-game leader at one point in time. At one point in time early in the year, some of the players behind the scenes complained about his lurking, saying it wasn't going well. This theory that... Here's the problem with his theory. I'll put his theory in a ridiculous light, shall I? He's imagining that you can keep the exact same lineup for months or years at a time, and that if they don't do this secret strategy of throwing, they can just stay on top. Because what reason would there be to get worse? Because players get worse, because the metagame changes, because players are no longer the best at their role, because strategies are designed to combat those players, because they don't adapt. There's a reason why in CS history, all of CS history, from 1.6 to CSGO, the team that's on top with the 5-man lineup never becomes the best team again in general. Fnatic did it a couple of times this year, and they're the best team of all time. Envious couldn't do it and become number 1 again. TSM couldn't do it and become number 1 again. Well, they were never number 1, technically. Old teams in 1.6 would be on top for a year, then drop off and become the 5th best team. They wouldn't just become second or drop off and then go back to number 1 again because there's no conspiracy. This is a very naive view. It doesn't fit. In fact, his fan theory doesn't work in history at all. All of history contradicts this theory. So, okay, this was one about my Thorin's thoughts about needing a pick and ban analysis phase screen so that we can structure it and we can have better discussion around it. So this guy, let me see, was downvoted, but he makes a point again that I've seen said many times, so I want to address it. So minus 11 points. If tournaments ever picked somewhat decent analysts, I might even watch the analysis segment sometimes. That hasn't been the case, so it would just be better to skip it to the game. If you started the game instead of having the mandatory 30 min of blah blah, you'd have a lot more time for matches and delays could be filled with the blah blah. I mean, actually, we do fill delays with blah blah, so it shows how much you know. We also wouldn't have a lot more time for matches. It's usually the matches we're waiting for, but I'll continue. Also, this isn't Dota 2 or something, where the pick bans really do matter. So he's implying pick ban map veto in CSGO doesn't really matter. Every top 10 team should be able to beat any top 10 team in any map, even if it's their weak map. What a fucking ludicrous premise. That doesn't work in any of the history of CSGO. So he's saying the 10th best team. So at the moment, Titan in my lineup should be able to beat Fnatic on Titan's weakest map. So, okay, I'll go off the top of my head. What would I say for Titan's weakest map? Overpass. So they should be able to beat Fnatic, who aren't an amazing Overpass team, but would definitely beat them on it. Why would that be then? What's the reason for why they should? He hasn't given a reason, by the way. It's just he says they should. And then he says, it's not like Team X picked Dust 2. That's a great counter for Team Y picking Mirage. It is. That actually is how it works. Oh, they picked the train map. We're not good on train, and we had to give that up, but that's our second worst map. It's okay. We better pick a map that's good for us now. So we'll go with Mirage in this scenario, which we know is better for us than them, and hopefully that can get us to a third map. That is really how it's working. I can't, in any way, see a good reason to dedicate a new segment just for talking about picks. Gave many reasons why. It structure the segments more. It'd give us a pacing to how we do it. We'd be able to actually preview the maps. Then when the maps come out, we'd be able to say why it's good picks, then what we think's coming next. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. This post isn't even within the realms of reality. Nor has it ever been if you go back into CS history. Why should any top 10 team be able to beat any other top 10 team on any map? Nothing about history suggests they should. That has never been the case. In fact, quite the opposite. Essentially, he just said that every top 10 team, for no reason, under every circumstance, should be able to beat every other top 10 team. I mean, we've seen that doesn't happen. I mean, sometimes you even have teams like Envious, who were the number 2 team early in the year, beating NiP, the number 3 team in the year, every fucking time they beat them, pretty much. Well, that doesn't work for whatsoever, because you know why? Because they had the map pool, because they had a counter in terms of style, and because they had the right star players to counter NIP star players. Likewise, real sports don't work that way. Every top 10 team in real sports, in all the sports, can't beat every other top 10 team. Because why? Stylistic matchups, approach that they take in a specific game, star performances from certain players. I mean, in real sports, you don't change the map, you just change the players and team you play, yet it still can't work with less variables there. Map pick and ban veto is incredibly important in CS. It's actually one of the most important things. Obviously, playing the game is the most important thing, but it's still extremely important. And when you pick and ban poorly, like TSM did the last few months, you hinder your results, as they did over the last few months. So, same thread. Let's have a look. This one was quite upvoted. Similar topic. Let me see. 28 points. My 2 cents is no one is really going to give a shit. It's not like Dota or LoL, where there's so many characters and a lot to analyse for each character pick ban. There's 7 maps. We pretty much know how each team plays, and they're actually pretty similar. Absolutely not the case already. We don't know how each team's going to play. The key thing about the elite teams, one of the reasons why I keep saying it's amazing that Fnatic kept rising to the top, is they changed up the whole style of play. At the early 2015, they were the CT side gods. They were playing always Inferno, Mirage, Cash, and then a bit of Dust 2 as a 4th map. That changed over the year. They were playing different maps. Suddenly, towards the end of the year, when ESL won Cologne, they became one of the best T-sided teams. They'd actually been quite weak T-sided for an elite level team early in the year. They used to win off getting 3 or 4 rounds with great Pronex mid-round calls. Now they were tearing off great streaks of T-side win rounds, winning T-side on maps like Inferno, or maps like Cash. This was a totally different style of play. So we don't always know how they're going to play. And coming into big tournaments, actually, teams preview things in online games that they're changing about their setup. I've seen games where TSM inexplicably, I think it was for PGL, just made it Device and Dupree who played B on Inferno as CT, yet they were already a good CT team, and they were still a good CT team afterwards, instead of it being Carrigan and Cajun or whoever it was at that point in time. They don't in any way change up that way, and we do need to preview this, and we have a lot we can discuss about the styles of play and how the specific styles counter each other on that map. Not just the teams in general, how they play against anyone, how will they play against this opponent? What are the key areas to watch? That's very important. Back to his comment. So, to be honest, I find pick ban pretty anticlimactic because of this. Get like 30 maps, and I'd be interested to see what happens. Again, not even vaguely accurate to what's happening. Here's another guy. I'm against giving more time to the analyst. I remember last major we missed a pistol round because Thorin was just talking too much, or they forgot to cut him. Dunno. Absolute bullshit. I have never held up a broadcast when the actual game was live and just kept talking and held the broadcast up. When I'm talking most of the time on the desk, additional to the basics like the map pick and stuff, that's because they're telling us in our ear, Phil, Game's not ready yet. One player's crashed out, PC problems, and we're filling. And if it's ever more boring, more abstract, that means we're definitely filling. We're doing you a fucking favour, so it's not just a test card with music on it. Would you prefer that, idiot? No. So then in this scenario that I was talking, that's why they missed the pistol round. No, we missed the pistol round because the producer fucked up and didn't even watch the game and was listening to us and didn't notice when the pistol round went live. As soon as they tell Rich in his ear, game's gone live, he'll say, right, sorry guys, got to stop your game's gone live. And we all stop talking. Take a look, it happens every time. Absolute bullshit. And anyone who says that is actually a liar. They just have it factually incorrect. I'm behind the scenes, I know. So when Semler reacted to Sponge raging out, as a comment that had 100, because remember Sponge had said that he doesn't like people saying they're trash or they're not a contender. This comment has 137 points. Never saw the criticism they got from casters, but what Sponge said is something I've always found annoying when watching analyst desks. Analysts is just shitting on teams that aren't top 5 pretty much. This applies to Thorin especially. Instead of just saying someone is crap and to disregard them, say what they need to do to improve or explain why they're trash. Not so much that I care about the teams, it's just low value content to completely disregard the lower level teams. Now this is a great example of a straw man, because when do I ever do that? I always give analysis of the teams in the matches and say how they can win and what they'll have to do and where the difficulties will be. I always do it. I never just say someone's trash and leave it at that. Other people may do that, I don't do that. Not only that, he says anyone who's not top 10 I say is trash. No, I definitely don't do that, the bottom 5 teams. If a team is a complete unknown that no one knows, no one cares about, and will go out in last place, like Skyred, and they were to play a best of 3 against Envious, I would still break it down, but at times I wouldn't go into massive detail because it doesn't warrant it. And that scenario, I might call them trash because that's a shorthand for they really aren't good. They're not going to be relevant in this match. I'm using the hyperbole of saying they're total trash, but they're not total trash. They are in the context of top teams to show how far apart the level is. I'm actually giving you better analysis by doing so. And again, I don't do that. I always say after a joke like this NA team's trash, but here's what they'd have to do to win the game. Here's what would have to go wrong for the other team. I always give analysis. Total straw man, yet it has 137 points. So fuckers are upvoting this guy. Okay, so this is when I did my thread that was, actually it was a column for Splice, now formerly Follow Esports. It was when IEM San Jose was happening, and I did a preview which was called the Glass Half Empty Guide to IEM San Jose. Now, first of all, it was a novelty thing. It was a fun little concept where I saw there were so many problems with the lineup for the tournament that it was massively underwhelming. And so rather than big up the tournament and say it's amazing and brilliant, I'm going to be one of the best tournaments of the year, which it wasn't, and it didn't end up being, instead, I used the preview to properly preview the teams and their chances and what would happen, but also in doing so to outline some of the problems with the tournament. So a guy responds, 24 points upvoted. TLDR, I don't like ESL because they fired me. So the only reason I wrote this whole article, the only reason I wrote all these facts is because they don't fire me. Consider this. So the best 2 teams in the world at the time, the top 2 ranked teams in the world, Envious and Fnatic, major champions, both dropped out of the tournament. There's that for a start off. That immediately makes it underwhelming. Then, some of the lesser teams in the tournament, C9, Liquid, CLG, Luminosity, these weren't even top 10 ranked teams, and yet they're making up half of the field of 8 teams. NIP were ranked number 6 at the time, or around there. They dropped out of the event as well, so now we've already got 3 out of the top 6 teams had dropped out. Then one of the top 4 teams in the world, Virtus.pro, has to go without Snacks. Not only their best player and the most consistent player, one of the best players in the world, one of the top 5 players in the world. So that team's now weakened as well. TSM was in a slump because they were coming off the major and everyone was worried about their performance and they had a worrying map pool. So even though they're supposed to be the favourites, they could potentially underperform because they're not playing well. G2 had only had 1 tournament where they'd played really well, and now they've just changed players after the major. So that's a big risk. It could go worse bringing in AZ instead of Dennis, who's left. So actually, the event went from being a potentially amazing event because it had Envious, Fnatic, NiP, had TSM, even though they're lesser, but they're lower down the rank, would have had Virtus.pro with Snacks. Instead of all these factors, it goes to an event that half the field aren't vaguely even top international teams. The good teams all have a weakness going into them, and as a result the event gets pretty depressing. It just shows how people's own flawed perspective on life is how they assign your view. So because they're corrupted, because if they got fired by someone, they would just be purposely negative at all times and lie and even say things that weren't true and purposely characterize it in a negative way. They assume I do that. Not the case at all. When ESL does things well, such as ESL World Close a Major was wicked, I give them credit for doing so. I don't have to do it because I'm not corrupt like you. Get fucked. So this comment had, let me see. Okay, this comment was in a thread about a tweet that I made where I said I didn't have sympathy for the NA teams who had passed on Alu and Pimp. This comment, again, massively upvoted, 152 points. It says, I don't understand. I haven't seen an NA team complain about half the shit Thorin and other analysts talk about them for like 6+ months. So I'll address that first. Okay, so because you haven't seen it, it doesn't exist, right? That's the implication. So I don't know what the fuck you've seen. I don't know what Twitters you follow. I don't know what Reddit comments you follow. I don't know what interviews you follow. I follow the scene extremely closely. I'd wager closer than you because it's my full-time job that I do 12 hours a day. I've seen interview comments where they made excuses like this and complained. I've seen Facebook posts that they've made about monitors and stuff. I've seen posts that they've made where they did vlogs and in it they complain about the excuses they had and the reason they were jet lagged and all the rest of it. I've seen Twitter comments about it. I've talked to them in real life and had them complain to me about this access you don't have. But because you don't have that access, just assume it can't exist and I'm an idiot as a result, right? Let's continue. Plus, who the fuck passed on Alu and Pimp? Does Thorin know each team's contracts and offers that have gone out? Pause. Yes, I do. In fact, I was talking to NA teams on behalf of Alu and Pimp, giving them contacts, telling them Alu and Pimp are available. Here's what might have to go on in terms of money. Here's the sort of offer I'd make. Telling Alu and Pimp, here's the sort of offers they can make. Do these seem good to you? Trying to broker the deals. So actually, you've said it there as if I don't know. Yes, I do know. You're the one who doesn't have information. And the fact you don't have information means your answer should be, I don't know. Not to say, I don't know, therefore I'm going to take the strong line opinion that he doesn't know. I'm going to make the assumption, the leap, that he doesn't know. Because I don't know, he can't know. So you're wrong. Who passed on Alu? I could tell you who, but that's private information behind the scenes. A number of teams passed on some of these players. Some of them didn't. Pimp particularly teams passed on. Alu, some teams wanted him and he chose not to in the end. But initially, some passed before this furore happened and I talked to some people and made this point to them. I'll continue with his thing. Isn't this one of the same guys who shit talks NA for changing rosters so much? I'll address this later on because I know there's another comment here. Absolutely not. You will never find me shit talking NA teams for changing rosters so much. Go and find me those tweets. Go on then. If you're someone who says, I haven't seen these things, well, I haven't seen those, motherfucker. And I was the one who makes the comments about whatever I say in my opinions. I haven't made tweets about that. I haven't made videos about that. I actually have an opinion 180 to that, as I will maybe address later if it's in this particular one. Let's keep going. And remember, that was massively upvoted, so everyone can suck a dick who upvoted that. So this was in my reflections with fraud, and it only has 1 point. It says, you can tell Thorin's respect for fraud was growing leaps and bounds by the end of the interview. In the beginning and middle, he seemed to disrespect him a little. Now again, why assume that you know our relationships? I have known fraud for over 10 years and met him in real life on a number of occasions, interviewed him many times. I'm not like you, the person who came along at the end and doesn't know these people. I worked on a fucking guide with him to Counter-Strike that we spent a whole month working on, back and forth, talking all the time on MSN and AOL Instant Messenger. I have all interview stuff with him. I wrote the guide with him and made him thousands of dollars. He's someone where I know all the information about his past and history and have known him many years, literally known many years. I wasn't disrespecting him in the beginning. What I was doing is putting hard questions to him. Questions that I know other people won't put to him, where other people will lionize early on in his career. I'm seeing what his answers are to what are potentially tough questions, or people who think he talks shit, or people who didn't like his personality. How does he respond to that? And because I know him, I know he can handle these, and I know the way I'm presenting them is the right sort of way. So your assumption that I'm disrespecting him is ridiculous. The idea that at the end of the interview I was like, oh, my respect, gosh, you're just the best, fraud. I've really come around to you. What a ridiculous leap in logic and assumption. No, actually my respect level hadn't changed for fraud because I've known him for so long that having one conversation with him for an hour and a half didn't somehow change my whole worldview on him, because half the shit I'd even discussed in the interview I've talked about him with in real life. Just I can't tell you that myself. I have to make it a fucking interview for you to get the information. Bloody hell. So then there was a post about me on roster changes, because I said that to me the only thing that changes roster teams significantly, except for extreme outliers, as a general rule, the only thing that changes teams significantly and makes them much better is roster moves. So this one, it only has a point, but this is an argument I hear a lot. So players improving their game isn't a significant improvement. Okay, which players? How do players improve their game significantly? That also very rarely happens. That individual players go mad up in the game. Happens sometimes, but the general trend is they don't. He loves to, and usually when they improve in that way, it wasn't them who improved. They had a better team system around them, or a player came in like a roster move and shifted them to a better position. That's why they go ham often. He loves to talk about how he used to trash Device all the time for not showing up big. But then he improved his game and is now a top tier player, one that Thorin cites as the best player in the world. Stop. I trashed him as in he was bad in the clutch. I never trashed him as a player and said he was a bad player. He's totally mischaracterizing me here. He also never improved massively his game. He improved his mental fortitude and became a top tier player. No, he was already a top tier player. He just became one of the best and eventually the best for a brief couple of months. Back to him. I guess that a player improving their own skill level is a rare exception. Definitely. How the fuck do players improve their skill level? That happens so rarely in history. And the fact that their results get better doesn't mean they improve their skill level. Back to him. I think that's horse shit. Watching players improve over time is an incredible part of following this game, and it's not something that just doesn't happen. First of all, that's a double negative. Don't do that. This is also doesn't account for coaching improvements and changes. Pause. Funny, I know about coaching changes and how rarely coaches have had any impact on the game, but this guy's seen interviews and seen people stood behind people who perform better in the game. Therefore, he knows no better than me. Back into him. Look at him, look at your man, back to me. For swapping roles, such as letting Fox opt for G2 instead of Makalele, organisational changes, God, I hope this guy's a Fox fan, organisational changes that allow for more/better practice, such as getting signed to a well-paid organisation like TSM, versus one that doesn't pay you properly like NIP. Right, that's ridiculous, because first of all, the example should be surely people going from Dignitas to TSM, because that's what they did, but actually their practice and all their resources were the same in Dig, they just got paid less. So, again, you don't know anything about behind the scenes, and are making assumptions. Now, unlike a team like NIP, okay, NIP was only not paid for certain months, and for certain old tournaments and stuff by the old management as well. It's not that they weren't paid, and therefore, because they didn't have money, they just didn't practice and didn't go to events and didn't have proper circumstances. That's ridiculous. Again, you don't know what you're talking about. The idea that there's a focus on making better strategies. Again, what do you know about making strategies? Now, what's funny is, this is another one of those people who always go to the Device example. Device is one of the biggest outliers in the history of CSGO because he was already a top 20 player who should have been top 10, but was held back just by nerves, not by skill. He didn't have to improve his skill. He didn't have to improve anything about his game. He didn't have to improve the way he played the game. He just had to improve his mental fortitude so he didn't choke. That's it. So it's one of the biggest outliers ever. Don't use that to talk about every player and how they're all going to improve. Ridiculous. There are maybe 2 players in history, no, less than that probably, who have ever improved as much as Device did in terms of the impact the small amount of his game had on his results. His actual level didn't improve that much at all. Many players improved way more than him. So, okay, this was one where... Let me see. Okay, here's one. This is about the sad truth about the rifle nerfs. And it was about Freiberg had made that comment about the reason 1.6 died is it didn't change a lot, which is obviously bullshit. This guy has 37 points. 1.6 died because it was a fucking 10 to 15-year-old game. By the mid-2000s, it looked like shit, Ruffle. By the time I picked up CSS in 2006 or so, 1.6 was near impossible to get into just because of the graphics alone. I remember how much 1.6 stayed huge, even larger than CSS pretty much the whole time, and how much the 1.6 players valued the balance and lack of changes. So basically, what I'm trying to say is Freiberg is full of it. Now, I agree with him. Freiberg's wrong, okay? Or I don't agree with Freiberg's characterization of 1.6 and what made it successful and made it die out. I don't agree. I think he's got a lot of good points here. I also just want to make a point, by the way, that one thing I always make a distinction about with the 1.6 graphics and CSGO's graphics is CSGO's graphics look nicer and more realistic and are more advanced graphics. But I actually think 1.6's graphics are better. They are better graphics in the context of an esports game because the visibility is much better, being able to pick out where an enemy is. There's no clutter on the 1.6 maps. The maps tend to be simpler colors, therefore there's less shading that can make it harder to pick people out. The visibility is actually better for players and people who like the game, even though the graphics, in terms of aesthetic sense of beauty, may appear more beautiful and better in CSGO. So that's a key point to make, actually, just about a distinction there. And yes, Freiberg, I believe, is incorrect. So there's a thread here where it was about North American Counter-Strike versus European Counter-Strike. And there's a 2-point comment that says, sometimes I like to imagine Dana White standing behind Liquid's backs, shouting, "So you want to be a fucking fragger?" while Hiko baits his team again. Now, here's the reason this is funny, because I can now give you a little anecdote. Jason Lake, alias One, the owner of Complexity, when he stood behind the Complexity team that was very good, 2004 to 2006, he actually used to kick their chairs and say, "Get me the pistol, bring me the pistol rounds," and all these things. He also had a great quote along these lines. So you want to be a fucking fragger. He had a great quote, which I remember a player on IRC used to have in their, like, I can't remember what you call it now. When you join the channel, it would say a message that you'd put in there, okay? And it was a Jason Lake quote that he said to Complexity when it was like a practice scenario where they didn't want to practice enough or something like that. He said, this is a real quote, it's epic. He said, "Want to be a loser? Go on welfare." I mean, whoo, that's like, and that's almost some Donald Trump level shit. But it is a hilarious quote, and I just thought I'd let you guys know about it. So, okay, here we go. So there's a thread where Stanislaw, set up, member of Conquest, said that their team wouldn't be part of the NA Shuffle, and then I made fun of him, saying that, like, essentially implying, like, well, why would anyone want any of your players anyway? They shouldn't be in the NA Shuffle. So a guy with 48 points said, "Makes fun of NA teams for always changing, makes fun of team for not changing." Now, that is literally the opposite of my philosophy. In fact, there's a guy later in the thread, 21 days, 30 points in a different thread, that said, "Casters and analysts shit on NA for changing rosters so much, then complain when they don't change rosters laws." Not me. Don't know who's saying that, mate, because I never complain about roster change. Because as I just outlined earlier, I think roster changes are the only thing that makes you significantly better. So all the NA teams this year, I've advised to make roster change. I advised C9 to cut nothing. I advised Liquid to remove a Dren and possibly a Liege. I advised CLG to remove FNS, to put Cutler back to in-game leader, to bring in a player like Eco, possibly remove Hayes depending on the lineup. I've always advocated roster moves. In fact, one of the first things I tend to advocate for most teams I think can get better is a roster move. That's because it's hard to figure out internal differences or change your strategy entirely if you've played for 6-7 months, played 7 or 8 lands, and you kind of capped out your potential. This is an entirely wrong mischaracterization of my opinion, something I've never said, and again, it's massively upvoted. So anyone who says, "Oh, it's all strawman," when he complains about people saying things about him on Reddit, is it really? Just watch this video. Tons of people, hundreds of comments that have upvoted. Hundreds of upvotes, rather. So this was where Fiflaren roasted Steel when they were playing an FPL match, and Fiflaren basically just said, like, you know, Steel, like, "I've accomplished more than you have in your career. I've won a major." So this guy here, it says 12 points. "I have a major title under my belt," quoting Fiflaren. And then he replies, "But you had 4 monsters to help you do it, Kappa." And a guy with 5 points says, "Yeah, but that's like saying Dennis Rodman, professional basketball player in the 90s and late 80s, had monsters like MJ, Michael Jordan, and Scottie Pippen to help him get 3 titles with the Bulls. It doesn't matter. He was a part of one of the best teams of all time." Now, the big problem with his analogy here is that he hasn't picked the analogy well to fit Fiflaren. Like, he's picked it to make a point about people who make a contribution to a team. Problem is, on that team, Dennis Rodman was the 3rd best player on that basketball team. Remember, you have 5 starting players, but you also have like 12 to 15 players overall if you count all the bench players. Dennis Rodman was the 3rd most important player to that team. He was one of the best rebounders of all time. He was one of the most versatile defenders. His defense was absolutely key because they're the best offense and best defense at the time. And so as a result, if you wanted to pick someone like Fiflaren, he should pick Ron Harper. Ron Harper was like an okay player who they just used because they needed a guard. And earlier in his career, in other teams, lesser teams, like mid-tier NBA teams, he was one of the better players in those teams, but he never would have won championships that way. But being just a role player on the Bulls, one of the least important players, but like a starter-type player, he was able to win 3 championships in this supportive but lesser role. Now, the reason this is funny as well is because also, by the way, Dennis Rodman won 2 championships with the Pistons when he was a younger rookie-type player, way before the Bulls. So actually, again, he showed that it wasn't just having Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen that won him titles. So, poor example. But this gets into a whole different debate now. Because then a guy, 107 points. Fiflaren has accomplished more in his CSGO career than anybody in NA together, lol. They have nothing on him. This is the problem. There's a reason why in my top 20 list, Fiflaren isn't on there. Meanwhile, Hiko's on there, NA player, Dosier's on there, Dupree's on there, a number of players who haven't accomplished as much, some of them who haven't even won big competitions in general. The reason why is because of the roles they play and the significance and importance of them in their team. All those players I just listed are much more important, play much more difficult roles and much more vital roles to their teams than Fiflaren did in NIP. You've just got to be reasonable in that particular respect. Like I did with the NBA analogy. Another comment later on, 6 points. Even if the player he chose for the analogy wasn't right, the point still stands, right? He was as much a part of the titles they got as everyone else. No, that's exactly the point I'm making. He wasn't as much a part of the titles as everyone else. He played his role, even at his role he wasn't the best. He was a part of the team, he was some part of their success. He wasn't as much as everyone else, and he definitely wasn't the most. This is a ridiculous statement. I mean, in the Bulls, the Chicago Bulls, so was Michael Jordan just equally as much a part of the championships as every other player? Was the player who was the 5th best on the team equally as good as Michael Jordan and important to the... No. Michael Jordan was the most important, the primary reason they won. Shaq on the Lakers, where he was dominant in 2000 and 2002, was he just part of the reason? Was like Mark Madsen as important? No, of course not. People who've played with Lionel Messi on the Barcelona teams, do you think they should be allowed to talk shit to Ronaldo because they've won more European Cups than Ronaldo? No. Because the difference is, if Ronaldo does anything, he's such a fantastic player and such a star player that he's actually of more value than those guys are. Those guys have gotten their reward. They got to have fucking trophies that they weren't the most important players for. Why did they also get to have the status of talking shit and being better than some other player who's clearly better than them and has accomplished more in terms of individual play? I love Fifth Florin, but he's my boy, but you've got to be real on this shit. So, okay, here's another one. Similar guy, 1 point. In my opinion, the proof he was as much a part of it as everyone else is that when he went 9-44, he's referring to the final of EMS 1 Katowice in March 2014 against Virtus Pro, they lost. Sure, he wasn't the best, but it's not like they could have done it 4v5. Now, first of all, there were some matches they almost did do it 4v5, where his stats were really terrible. In fact, here's the funny thing. There were actually tons of games in 2014, because that was the year where he really dropped off, where Fifth Florin was a big anchor in terms of frags. He was really underperforming in terms of frags compared to anyone in an elite level team. Yet the team still won 8 LANs in 2014. And, I've got that wrong. They didn't win 8 LANs. They still won a number of LANs. I think they won 4 titles in 2014. They still won titles even with him underperforming. Not only that, but at 8 LANs in 2014, he finished in minus double digits for the entire LAN. Think about that. Double digits minus for the whole LAN. 8 of them in 2014. And they only played 11 LANs that year. And one of those, by the way, was even domestic against fucking Swedes. At ESL 1 Cologne, the tournament they won, their only major win for NIP, where he was the champion, this is the major we're talking about, he was minus 72 for the whole tournament. Now, you might say, but I'm sure the worst player on every team does that when they win a major. Absolutely not. Go back and look at the stats. You won't find it. In this tournament... You might say, but he did have series where he was good, right? In the final against Fnatic, which they almost lost, he was minus 18 for the series. In the semi-final against LDLC, another close series, minus 22. And in the quarterfinal against Cloud9, where they really were extremely close to losing, he was minus 24, almost straight up lost them the series. Earlier in the year, Star Series 9, NIP finished second. He was minus 25 over only 2 maps against Na'Vi in the first round of that tournament. And Na'Vi wasn't even considered a top 5 team at the time. Okay, let's go back to 2013. Because in 2013, he only started to drop off a bit, but he still had the odd tournament there. Star Series 6, they won this title. They beat Na'Vi in the final. He was minus 24 for the whole tournament. 2012... Admittedly, he used to go minus back then. He was also pretty good at his role, and he was doing well, and he was fragging well, he was contributing well, he was doing a good job. And that's why the team was 87-0. They were fantastic. 2013, they were still one of the best teams in the world, still a very good team. He was only minus in smaller margins, or every now and then he'd be a plus for an event. It was 2014 he started to drop off big time. Don't deny it, don't pretend it wasn't the case, and don't make weird apologist excuses for it and act like he was equally as much of those tournaments as Get Right, the fucking superstar, one of the best players of all time, my favourite player, my best player of all time in CSGO history. Getting towards the end here. I'm alive. Okay, so this is for a By the Numbers episode. This is the one, actually, last episode, where Richard mentioned that like Henry G and DDK kind of threw him under the bus with the Raheem thing because they wouldn't come out and just say like that's not the case. Like, for example, Henry made a comment saying he was in hell because of how horrible the event was. People took that as meaning because he was with Richard and Richard was bullying Raheem, yet Henry could have said, well, it wasn't the case. Now, here's the thing. I know why Henry didn't. He just didn't want to make a big deal. But this guy goes way too far. 3 points. Fuck Henry G's, DDK's, because you're worried what Reddit idiots will do. This part pissed me off. If anything, Reddit would be on their dicks 24/7 if they confirmed the R. Lewis version. Some people just don't like being a focal point of some kind of drama every other month. They just want to enjoy the games, give their best on the desk, and go home in calm. They don't need the noise in between. Now, what's great about this is, Richard has known DDK many years. Remember, we're all these people are from the UK, like me and Richard are. He's known DDK many years. He's even been doing desks with him and on-camera stuff with him for like, I think about a year or so. Henry G, he has known since he was like 17 years old, back in Source like 10 years ago or something crazy. Well, maybe not 10, maybe like 8 years ago. He's known him all that time since. He's actually legitimate friends with him. And yet this guy who doesn't know Richard on a personal level, doesn't know Henry G on a level, is now reading the mind of Henry G and analysing what Henry G must be thinking about and why he didn't come forwards with it. This is how ridiculous people are on Reddit. It's like the fact they know nothing, that vacuum doesn't make them think, I don't know anything, I should probably sit back on this and wait for some information. They go, I don't know anything, I'm free to fill this vacuum with all the bullshit in the world and then say it's true. A couple more to go. Okay. This one is about when Fnatic won loads of money. So a guy mentions like 205 points. You know, it's surprising that they only won. It was actually about $800,000 because $800,000 you actually get for 7th to 8th place at the International, their World Championship, the Dota 2 tournament. And he mentions, you know, the majors have 3 million each for them in Dota 2, whereas the E-League, even in CSGO, only has 1.2 million for a season. Another guy adds in 4 points. Why everyone always complain about prize pool? You all forgot stickers money. It's almost like stickers aren't part of the prize pool, mate. We're talking about prize money here that you win. Sticker money, if you accumulate it all from Katowice, Cologne and Cluj, it's about 10 to 15 million. I don't think it is, actually. I think that's actually incorrect. But okay. Anyway, and it says, yeah, Valve can stop all this system and all the money crowdfunded can be put into the prize pool. Exactly, you've caught onto it right there. Why doesn't some of that money go into the prize pool? Then teams would win more, not just get assigned it on popularity. But it's just different to Dota. Yes, it's different and it's worse. You can have players making some money from sticker money, but it's not as good when the best team of the year wins like 12 events, including 2 majors, and doesn't have the same as a fucking 7th to 8th place team at the International. Now, how much did they make from stickers? You don't know. I know, or I can speculate based on what people tell me behind the scenes, but you apparently know, and you know that it's as good as if their team had won majors and internationals. It's not, by the way. Anyway. Last one, well, at least last section. So this was about, I was actually on the thread about Lurpus's bold comments, where, let me see, where one of them was he said there would be a major in Asia next year, which, by the way, I would go ahead and bet my life that there won't be a major in Asia next year. So this guy with 48 points similarly agrees with me. If a major happens in next year, I'll eat my mouse pad. Agreed. It's not a big game there. It's irrelevant there. 9 points, and it's not free to play. 9 points. Yeah, I don't really see that happening this year. CS has very, very little influence in Asia. It'd be more likely to see one in South America, in my opinion. That won't happen either, but I don't think it's more likely even. But neither will happen, you're right. But I doubt that will happen this year either. Then this guy responds, 4 points. Great way to influence. So he's implying that by having a CSGO major in Asia, you will influence Asians to play CSGO. Doesn't actually make any sense to me. Right? Who is going to attend or watch a tournament for a game that not only they don't play and haven't watched before, but they've never heard of? If a kid in a Chinese PC cafe, this is how they play games there, goes to a Chinese PC cafe, he either plays a game he knows, or he goes on the PC and he looks and there's all these free-to-play games, he clicks one, starts playing. How will he even find out about CSGO? How will he ever find out in this LAN cafe that CSGO exists as a major? He won't. He doesn't read HLTV.org, doesn't read Reddit Global Offensive. He will never find out. And even if you told him, there's a big tournament going on for CSGO, he'd go, what is CSGO? Or he'd go, I don't play that game. He would never sit down and watch the whole tournament. There'll be very, very small amount of people who will do that. It will not have a significant influence on people to do so. That's an extremely naive way to look at the world. The big ways you can influence Asia is make a free-to-play version of the game, have some sort of deal with LAN cafes where they have it installed on all the machines there, give bonuses, like when they play on a LAN cafe version, they get a free low-level skin or something, or they get some starter skins or something like that. Whatever the case might be, they might get bonus XP playing matches, whatever you do, this is the kind of thing you could do to influence it being played in Asia. Okay, that's the end of Thorin vs. Reddit episode 4. CSGO got its head pounded in there. If you want to play fantasy esports, do so at Alpha Draft.